The starting point for us offering this program tonight is the question, why? Why Sabbath? And for us as a group, discerning what we would offer through the center, that theme started popping up in different ideas, in different things that were motivating and energizing us around what kind of programming might be important, what kind of storytelling might be important to engage in. But that question, why Sabbath, is, in a sense, personal to some degree. And so I was thinking about why Sabbath for me. And I thought about how I could answer that. Why Sabbath? And I thought about the different relationships that I have or that I am. I am priest, I am parent, I am wife, I'm daughter, I'm friend, I'm neighbor. And most importantly to me, I am a child of God. So when I ask the question, why Sabbath? For me, I start with, well, God commanded it to be so. I start with the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Because I also am feeling a great sense of privilege to be a priest in God's church. The second reason I say why Sabbath is because I take my ordination vows seriously. And one of the vows that I made when I was priested was answering the question, will you do your best to pattern your life and that of your family in accordance with the teachings of Christ so that you may be a wholesome example to your people? That's important to me. And it is something that I have to choose to do, choose to be every day. A wholesome example to your people, which, by the way, I don't interpret as I need to be a lot like the Andy Griffith Show, wholesome. I don't mean that. What I take that to mean is, how do I model for me and my household, and therefore the people that I'm privileged to serve, an idea of wholeness? And Sabbath is an integral part of that. Third, and I almost hesitated to say this, but it's true, I am contractually obligated to observe Sabbath. In this diocese in which I serve, it is non-negotiable. Clergy must have one contiguous 24-hour period of Sabbath. The question is, do I always follow that? That is a whole other question entirely. And we'll perhaps revisit that a little bit later in our conversation. But more than that, why Sabbath? Because Sabbath is an integral part of my weekly rhythm. I think about how during most of the week, on most days, I am in a system of production. I am in a system of doing and making and going and producing. And what Sabbath does, or what it's intended to do, I believe, is to step out of that system of production, that system of me giving, and step into a moment of receiving. To step into a system that fills and settles and helps me to abide, to be. Because I believe that I cannot do the doing, I can't do the producing without having a moment of receiving and nourishing and being restored. Now, again, it's a very challenging thing to do, to prioritize that space and that time every week. But nonetheless, it is critical. So tonight, we're going to ask Martin the question of why. Why Sabbath? We're going to hear in just a moment in a clip from the film, some responses to that. And then we'll engage in some further conversation, both Martin and I, and we hope that all and each of you will engage in this conversation tonight as well. The reason Martin Doblemeier is here tonight is because of Dana Green. Dana Green has presented programs for the Center on Evelyn Underhill and on the poetry of Denise Levertov. And she introduced Martin to us through Lisa Richard. And my goodness, am I grateful. We already have been so immensely blessed by our budding relationship with Martin. And I am so grateful that you're here this evening. Martin is founder and president of Journey Films here in Alexandria. It's a documentary film company with a focus on religion and faith and spirituality. And since 1983, he has directed 35 feature-length documentary films. They air on PBS, on major networks, including NBC and ABC, and the BBC and networks around the world. His subjects have included folks you're familiar with, no doubt. Mother Teresa, Elie Wiesel, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Billy Graham, Pope John Paul II, civil rights leaders Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson, presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, and others. His other films include Bonhoeffer on the great German theologian and Nazi resistor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And there's a series of films on inspiring figures from the 20th century like Howard Thurman, who was a spiritual mentor to Martin Luther King Jr., the Catholic activist Dorothy Day, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Martin's work has taken him around the world. He is an Emmy-winning and director and has received 3 honorary degrees. The point here is that he has credentials, and we're so glad that he's here and that he will speak with us tonight on his latest production, Sabbath, which is now airing on PBS stations. So welcome to Martin, and welcome to his wife, Yelena. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. And we'll do next is watch a clip of the film before we begin our conversation.
6 days you may labor and do all your work.
But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God.
Keep it separate. Keep it set apart from the ordinary rhythm of time.
There's a good reason why, historians are saying that post-World War II, we entered the period called the Great Acceleration. It's that people now feel the pacing of their lives has accelerated to a point where they don't have time to care for themselves. They don't have time to care for family members.
I think our culture right now is profoundly burned out.
2/3 of Americans say that they're working more than 40 hours any given week. We have to work more in order to sustain the same level of living.
The labor movement in America is a surprisingly religious story, and it does often converge at the issue of Sabbath.
Shabbat is a revolutionary concept. It actually changed human history. For the first time, it introduced the concept of mandated rest.
The very heart of the idea is a kind of workers' rights idea.
Sabbath has ethical implications. Work should not be what defines us as human beings.
It's a commandment. It comes from God. That's why we observe Shabbat.
As a Christian, I don't think we take the Sabbath seriously enough.
If Sabbath rest was going to flourish and live in their lives, something else was going to have to die.
And I just never had an appreciation for the Sabbath day or understanding of it. All of that came to me recently. And I've been pastoring 34 years.
A lot of what it translates into is, I wish I just had more time in which I just paused to breathe, to think about what it was that I was actually chasing after.
We realize that time is our only non-renewable resource.
Latino Catholics identify with the story of Exodus, the story of the Israelites wandering the desert.
It's like the whole week is hectic, and then all of a sudden, you light the Shabbos candles, and you're in a different world.
Sabbath isn't simply a pious teaching. It's not an add-on. What's at issue is the very meaning of life.
St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer, Massachusetts, is home to a community of Trappist monks who gather 7 times a day for communal prayer. Their daily life is guided by the rule of St. Benedict, the 6th century saint whose rule has provided direction and a rhythm for monastic life for 1,500 years.
The life rests on 3 pillars, and those 3 pillars are prayer, work, and reading. It begins at 3:30 in the morning, and it goes through 8 o'clock at night.
The chant that we now call Gregorian was developed between the 9th and 11th centuries in Europe, in monasteries throughout Europe. All the chants originally were sung by memory, and that originated with the synagogues. The early Christians went to the synagogue, naturally, so they knew the music, the hymns, the psalms, brought that into the Christian liturgy.
And foundational to daily life is the Benedictine expression handed down through the ages: ora et labora, pray and work. Here, prayer takes priority, and all work has value.
The monastery depends on the labor of the monks for its daily running, for its upkeep. So monks cook, clean, do the laundry, grow vegetables. That's all part of our daily life.
Ora et labora, which kind of sums up the Benedictine ideal. What's important is, in what spirit do you embrace that work? You see, that's where the spiritual connects with the practical, with the necessary. All work is important if it is a service done for your brothers and sisters. So there's nothing too sublime and there's nothing too menial.
Certainly, the Trappists themselves were totally agricultural for such a long time. I would say it's only become like in the last 30 years where you find the monasteries shifting significantly to mechanized operations.
All Benedictine monasteries strive to be self-sufficient, to live by their works. This community supports itself primarily on small industry, the making of incense, the creation of clergy vestments, and since the 1950s, the production of their own brand of Trappist preserves. Yet all work stops when the bells call the brothers to prayer.
So we have this automatic readjust. If you can follow it, it's a very good discipline.
Even with a discipline that calls the brothers to pray throughout the day, Sunday Sabbath is special.
For us, Sunday begins on Saturday evening in a ritual way with Vespers, and it all point to this being a special day.
In the Christian tradition, the Jewish Sabbath of rest and repose kind of merges with the day of resurrection. You arise earlier to meet the risen Christ and to praise God in the risen Christ. That's an essential part of the Christian Sabbath.
For Catholics, Sunday is centered around the celebration of the Mass.
We're not in a rush. We really take our time with the liturgy. I usually tell the people, well, we don't have any place to go. This is where we are, where I live. This is our life here. And we have the time to enjoy it.
So what really helps for the communal celebration of Sabbath when you're living a cenobitic or communal life is that the energy level and rhythm and collateral noise of the place really goes down. And so you can hear that it's the Sabbath.
We don't make an explicit statement, we come here so that we can keep Sabbath better together. No, but that's understood because the whole way of life is kind of sabbatical.
Actually, St. Benedict gets very detailed. He says between these hours and these hours, we want the brothers to be occupied in what we call Lectio Divina, which is reading of spiritual texts.
We're talking 6th century St. Benedict, the rule. Most people were illiterate. Why were monks not illiterate? And we know from just reading history that monasteries become centers of learning and all that. I mean, we all know that. But why? So that they could read the scripture. So that in fact, the Sabbath prescription and Benedict, that they may devote themselves more wholeheartedly to sacred reading. It requires learning how to read, and it creates a culture of the Bible, and therefore of letters. And the activity of reading and meditating and praying, which is the heart of the Christian observance of the Sabbath.
So every Sunday, the community gathers to listen to the abbot. The abbot is the spiritual father of the community. Sunday, I think, is the moment for us to return to the essentials of our life.
I always think of St. Augustine's saying from the Confessions that I cannot rest, Lord, unless I rest in you.
Seems to me that God is calling us to deepen our appreciation of this Sunday rest.
And so the Sabbath is really the day that we remember who we are and we remember who God is. It's the day to renew both our humanity and our purpose and our relation to the whole creation.
The essence of the Sabbath is not what we get out of it, but how we treat the world differently. All the things that you're not supposed to do on the Sabbath according to Jewish ritual law are things that are creative acts that transform the world around us in some way. And so we're letting the world rest. The world has to rest from us. It's not just us resting from ourselves. The world has to rest from us.
The Sabbath is a weekly thing, every seventh day. But in the Old Testament, there is also a Sabbath year. Every seventh year, the land will rest. There will be a retreat from intervening in the earth, in the land.
It's Spring Cleanup Day at Abundance Farm in Northampton, Massachusetts. Abundance is a creative farming project supported by Congregation B'nai Israel with help from the Lander Grinspoon Jewish Academy and the Northampton Survival Center that serves those in the area who struggle with food insecurity.
The Spring Workday is our yearly, big community workday event. We mulch the entire prayer space, the entire playground, our herb garden. So it's a chance to kind of spruce up the farm and get ready for the season ahead.
Here at Abundance Farm, they're bearing witness to one of the most important and challenging dimensions of the Sabbath story. This is the year of Shemitah, the once every 7-year call to release and to rest.
Shemitah is Grand Sabbath. It's called Shabbat Shabbaton, a Sabbath of Sabbaths. So it's a full year of Sabbath, the 7th year in a 7-year cycle. But we don't refrain from all kinds of work the entire year. What we refrain from, traditionally, according to the religious law, is agricultural work. And that includes not just things that you do to farm the land, but any kind of thing you would do to store and hoard food so that you can sell it. It's forbidden to sell the produce of the Shemitah year.
For 6 years we've been busting our butts, digging them holes and filling them up. Now we're gonna rest, release, renew. Come on, share that shepherd with you. Say, come on down to a little piece of heaven. Been working 6 years. Hey, gonna rest. release, renew, do a little singing and dancing too.
We've made a commitment to start putting certain beds into a full year of cover crop, a perennial cover crop that lets the land rest. A cover crop is any plant that you're not trying to harvest anything from. It's a very Shemitah concept where you're planting certain plants in order to improve the soil as opposed to gain benefit through harvest from them.
The other thing we focus on a lot this year is the planting of perennials and the distribution of perennials as much as possible to the community, because a Shemitah-based agricultural society is one that is heavily dependent on perennials. So there's, food that kind of gives of itself in the 7th year without you needing to till the land, without you needing to plow and work and plant.
Technically, from the standpoint of the tradition, most of the agricultural laws only apply in the land of Israel. But certainly we and many other Jewish farms in North America feel that these are such compelling core traditions that, whether or not we feel like there's a technical obligation, we can't imagine not putting them into practice in some ways.
So there's been several movements of farming in the diaspora Jewish world. But the current one that we're in, which is so much motivated by ecology and this sense of responsibility to the earth, is really pretty new.
The values of the sabbatical year are baked into Abundance Farm for all 6 years in a different way as well. In that, one of the values that undergirds Abundance Farm is this idea that the land is hefker, meaning it's ownerless, which is a value or an understanding of land that traditionally only applies in the sabbatical year. But we've sort of expanded it to all 7 years of the cycle here at Abundance Farm.
The halachic law, the law about how humans are supposed to interact on the sabbatical year, is that we should treat all people equally so that anyone can go into anyone's field. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. Where you come from, Jewish, not Jewish, you go in anyone's field and take whatever you want, because nobody owns anything.
So all of our contributions to Survival Center clients happen through our Pick Your Own program. Twice a week, anyone who wants can come through and pick from our fresh herbs, berries, vegetables, however much they want.
And part of that's living in a kind of trust in relation to God, in relation to the world around you, in relation to each other, more importantly, because if we can't hoard food, then we're entirely dependent on how we interact with each other and what we share, and creating equality between people.
Shemitah you could see as really as a blueprint for society. It's not a vision for a 7th year, it's a vision for civilization. In order to truly observe it in the way in which it's envisioned, you construct a society that operates 6 years in order so that you can actually observe the 7th year. You have to build a sharing economy such that you can't learn these things when you're in it.
At the end of the Shemitah year, there is still one more challenge.
In the day of Shabbat, one is living in potentially radical equality with the people around you and sharing with the people around you. And in the Shemitah year, one is doing that even to a greater degree. You're not allowed to hoard food. You're not allowed to sell it. You have to share it. But at the end of the Shemitah year, there's also the rule that all debts are forgiven.
This idea of forgiving debts has always been seen as one of the most challenging dimensions of the Sabbath and Shemitah teaching.
Thousands of years ago, in the context of the Torah, this was already the most radical teaching. And I would assert that all the more so today.
Our ancestors, they understood that a civilization that didn't stop would destroy itself. And we see the evidence of that all around us.
Another link to God that Shabbat brought into my life was this notion that I was being connected to practices that my ancestors had practiced.
It's hard to reflect positively when you're constantly running on empty.
And it's really that element of stopping and realizing that we're part of something greater than ourselves, which I think we see in the community.
And so congregations have a way to offer rest, have a way to build home and comfort in an otherwise very chaotic life.
So the real target, I think, of Sabbath rest is not just stopping, but figuring out what to do with the restlessness.
When we rest together, when we worship together, we are equipped then to go out into the world and do the work together.
The Sabbath is made to teach humanity something. It's made to teach us how we need to live in the world so that the world lives and thrives.
Was the establishment of the Sabbath for God or for us? In other words, by God setting an example of resting, is God saying, this is what it means to be a part of creation?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
So Martin, I wanted to begin tonight or continue this evening with that same question I began with, which is why? And I think to expand on that just a little bit, I would say, why did Sabbath come to you as an inspiration for your film? Why this film and why now?
Well, first of all, thank you to everybody who helped put the evening together, to Lisa and to Chris and everybody for this. It's great to be in this space. This is a fabulous space, isn't it? I mean, it feels welcoming, it feels warm, and you've got a great thing going here. You really do. So why the film? As you said before, I've been doing films now on religion, faith, and spirituality for about 40 years. And about 12 years ago, I did a film on the Seventh-day Adventists. And because I have friends who are Seventh-day Adventists, and I spent a number of months in the community, about a year actually in the community. And Seventh-day Adventist, an American-born religion, started in the mid-1800s here in the United States. They have a very clear understanding of Sabbath. It's part of the theological tradition of Seventh-day Adventists. And they also happen to be among the healthiest people on the face of the earth. And when I presented that notion to public television and said, well, this is an American-born religion, they weren't that interested. And when I said, well, it was founded by a woman, they weren't that interested. And then when I said, you know, they are the healthiest people on the face of the earth. Oh, now that is something we're interested in, they said. So that became part of the thread for making that film on Seventh-day Adventists. But Seventh-day Adventists, if you know, they tend not to drink or smoke. They're not the first people you would think to have to the party, right? But they are firm believers in Sabbath, and they take that day seriously. And that was a central part of the film. And I sort of, released the film and then let it go for a number of years. And then a couple of years ago, I did the film on Abraham Joshua Heschel, and reread his book, The Sabbath, and that once again struck the chord for me. And then thirdly, I'm sitting at home like everybody else is. All the congregation, every church is closed. A pandemic has changed everything. And I realized how devastating it was for people in community to be in community, how all of this is sort of being recalibrated. And it just reinforced for me the idea that Sabbath was a central piece of the puzzle as human beings that we were missing. And so we set out towards the end of the pandemic. So you see a lot of the people in the film, we're still wearing masks. So we were out in about a year ago this time, actually in the process of shooting the film. But we were, I want to recommend, I don't recommend making a film on any subject in the middle of a pandemic. It was really a struggle to do it, but we were able to get it done. And in some ways, I think it reflects that period of time in our national history when churches were trying to figure out who they could become, given the parameters that we were all facing at the time. So the film, it's been a wonderful response to the film. It's now airing nationally on public television. The response has been terrific. And I think in part it's because we're all feeling some sense of burnout. And religious or not, we're all looking for some kind of way to deal with that and how to think about that. And our argument is that Sabbath was given to us as a gift from the very beginning, from the outset, and it's still there for us to think about it. And I don't think in terms of presenting it as an absolute. That's not me to begin with, but it's more of what I see it as. It's an invitation for people to think about their lives in a much more rhythmic way, as I think was intended by God, and to see the different things that Sabbath opens us up to, notions of Sabbath and justice, notions of Sabbath and how we build community, notions of Sabbath and the environment. All these things, I think, are underlying sub-themes of Sabbath, and that's what we did in the 2 hours. What you saw was 20 minutes, roughly 18 minutes of a 2-hour film. So there's a lot that we haven't been able to get to, is what we showed in the clip tonight, but it's available there to take a look at. And I think that's what happened to me. I think I've been doing these kind of films for a long time. And once we got into the subject matter, it just sort of opened and opened and expanded and opened. And that's what we like to see.
I think the timing of it during pandemic is fascinating. And I made this connection in the film early on. One of the rabbis says that Sabbath arrives. We don't make it arrive. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we say, okay, now it's Sabbath. It's already Sabbath, whether we're operating in that way or not. Another one said, Sabbath doesn't come when we shut down our computers at the end of the week. Sabbath comes with the sunset. And the pandemic, in a sense, was that, in a way, a Sabbath, right? Saying, you will have to stop. You will have to stop in so many ways.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you see rippling, at least the way I told the story, was that there are a lot of things that run sort of point counterpoint. So there are people who believe that Sabbath begins at sunset on the night before. Right. And I know a lot of people who carry with them the calendar for what time is sunset officially beginning on this particular day. They take it literally. Other people are much more fluid. Some people think that Sabbath is for them, that it's my chance to stop and rest. Other people think, no, Sabbath is this moment in which we're supposed to gather in community as people. And so all those elements, I try to interject all of that into the film, because I think ultimately the American television audience is pretty intelligent. They're going to look at it and they're going to extract what really resonates with them. And I think for me, I think to see this. The sense that I think we can create. Sabbath was given to us as a gift, and yet it's only the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's our opportunity to take that framework and build something unique ourselves. So, for example, I was just in Pittsburgh over the weekend. I did an event at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and we had a Zoom conversation. And somebody when we showed the film, and then at the end of it, somebody sent in a question via Zoom. And they said, well, what am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. I'm at home, I'm taking care of a loved one. And I am I'm the principal caretaker for that loved one. What am I supposed to do? And that, I've heard variations of that. I mean, what am I supposed to do? This is just the moment. I've heard people who say to me, well, what are we supposed to do now? We work as first responders. What are we supposed to do? Not work on the day? Oh, no. So I think Sabbath really calls us to sort of reimagine the possibilities. I said to the person who called in on Zoom, I said, look, first of all, I would, what am I supposed to say? No, walk away from your loved one for that day. It's your Sabbath. Tell them that, too bad. No, the truth of the matter is this is their Sabbath too. And my suggestion was that maybe between the two of you, you can make that day special. Maybe it's just the lighting of a candle, the special meal that you create for that particular person at that particular moment. Maybe you read their favorite poem from their favorite poet, something that says today is not the same as the other 6 days of the week. And you can make that day Sabbath in your own particular way. So, I'm not, personally, I'm not quite the literalist that some people are, but I respect that. I understand that. And yet at the same time, I think it's an invitation to do something very special and very different.
Yeah. Rabbi Seidenberg says the Sabbath is made to teach humanity something. And you've already mentioned some of the things that this film has taught you in your encounters with folks about Sabbath in terms of justice and community and environment and that communal aspect, really that whole all of creation aspect. But if I may ask, what about for Martin? What about, for you in your world, what has it taught you?
I want to say every filmmaker will tell you that there's little clips that become their favorite over time, and that changes. So you'll watch the film for like 2 weeks in public settings, and you'll say, oh, that's my favorite little clip. Oh, and then 2 weeks later, you'll say, oh, no, that's my favorite little clip. I like that one the best. And I was watching it tonight, and I was thinking, I love the line from the monk up in Massachusetts who says that despite the fact that we get up every single morning at 3:30 in the morning and pray 7 times a day, Sabbath is really different. And the collateral noise in the place really goes down, and you can hear that it's Sabbath. And I love that. I just thought that, the moment he said that in the interview, I said, oh, that's going in the film. That's got to go in the film, because in some ways that sort of resonated as what it's really all about, the notion of finding the place of peace for the moment. And so for me, despite the fact that the translations always say it's the day of rest, I actually prefer the word finding a sense of contentment. That's become the sort of mantra for me related to the notion of Sabbath, because you can do all the Sabbath stuff. You can go to your services, you can participate, you can come to meals afterwards, you can do all of that and still have your mind someplace else, still have your mind working. I see people in church and they're doing this at the same time the service is going on, not during your sermon, not during the sermon. But the truth of the matter is, it's about saying about taking on the line and taking it seriously to say, this is the one day a week that I'm going to say to myself and to everyone around me, I'm going to send the signal that I've done enough, I have enough, and I am enough. And that's the mantra that I think I allow to sort of wash over me for that one day a week. And it's like you. I mean, I spent my Sunday in Pittsburgh doing the presentation of the film. You work really hard on Sunday. You work hard so that everybody else can have their Sabbath, have a good Sabbath experience. And then you've got to find your own Sabbath. You've got to pick your day, and you got to hold to it. And when I ask pastors all the time, I say, well, are you taking your Sabbath? Yeah, kind of I'm doing it. When is it? Well, Thursday, usually, unless somebody calls and I have to go into a hospital visit or some other kind of thing. But if you think of it not so much in terms of an absolute, but in a sense that this is the moment where I can actually find some sense of rest and peace, but also contentment. Yeah. That I'm actually done my job and there's no more ministering that's going to happen this week. This is the one day that I'm going to slow down and stop. And that's the word I think that I've held on to as a result of making the film, that's really done some transforming in my own life.
Yeah. So much of it has to do with our treatment of time. Rabbi Heschel called Shabbat or Sabbath a cathedral in time. And he writes about how time was holy before, long before spaces became holy or sacred. And so I think we often in secular society talk about time as being precious, but there is a distinction here with Sabbath of understanding time as holy. And so I'm just wondering how does it then how does it become something that we keep to something that we experience and we treat as holy? What is it for each of us that gives it that level of respect and honor?
Well, I think at the heart of Heschel's theology is this notion that God is looking for us. God needs us in the sanctifying of the world, that we are directed by and empowered by God to actually transform the world around us in the name of God. But God needs needs us, the power of us to be able to make these transformations happen. So in some ways, Sabbath becomes the gift. It's written in stone. It's ours to do with what we can. And yet I think he's waiting for us. The invitation's there and he's waiting for us to do what we can with it. I think that's pure Heschel. I mean, not for us to sit back and say, well, what's expected of me, but actually what's expected of us is clear, that this is the world that's been given to us. And we have the power to make our stamp on this world and to transform the world in the image of God. Sabbath becomes the day to do that. Sabbath is, in principle, supposed to be some little sliver. In Jewish tradition, it's 1/60th of the world to come. And so if you ask yourself, well, what am I doing on that day to reveal a little bit of what is the world to come? I think, I was with a Presbyterian minister this weekend on a panel, and we were having a conversation. She said, well, I think ultimately when we imagine heaven, part of our imagination is Sabbath. Sabbath is at the core of that imagination of what the world is to be. We have the opportunity to help create that image, to be able to say, this is the kind of a day that I'm going to help shape in the imagination that God gave me the opportunity to participate in. And that's what I think is the great mystery of it.
Sure. We've really focused a lot on the Judeo-Christian understanding of Sabbath, but you explore other traditions, certainly. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about what you learned, maybe about Jummah or.
Yeah, well, I think once we started to announce we're going to do the film, I was asked several times by people, well, what do Muslims think in terms of Sabbath? And the answer is that there is no literal Sabbath in Islam, but there is something that's akin to it, if I can say it that way. Friday is the day. It's the day of Jummah prayer, and it's every week Friday, and throughout the course of history, people would pray in their mosques locally, but then on Friday you went to that great mosque because Friday was special, and you would come in your best clothes, and you would dedicate the trip to the mosque to God, and that you would return from it, and then you would do something for others. You would do some sort of social justice act, or you would do some feeding, or you would do something for somebody else other than yourself. And so, aren't there interesting parallels? You know, so they don't call it Sabbath. That's not language that Islam uses. But Jummah, the Jummah prayer, the day of Friday, the day of Jummah prayer, has a lot of similarities that I think that's why they wanted to be part of the film. I said I'm a friend of Khalid Latif, who's the imam up in New York, and I said, you know, I'm doing this. Am I stretching it? Am I stretching it too far to say that, you know, we're doing a film on Sabbath and I'm inviting you to be part of this? No, he's like, I get what you mean. I think what we do in earnest, there are a lot of similarities. Don't call it Sabbath. We don't really think of it as Sabbath, but you're right. There are a lot of similarities here. And yes, please come be with us for our Friday Jummah prayer. And he ministers to the many young students at New York University and a lot of Wall Street people. He's right down on Wall Street. So it was interesting to see the congregation that he builds at the Islamic Center at New York University, a combination of students and the Wall Street execs.
Yeah, I really appreciate that expansion of understanding of Sabbath, even if they don't call it Sabbath, just because how necessary it's always been necessary, but it feels so strikingly so right now to find common ground, right? To find common experience, and the words and the terms can often get in the way of that. We each have our own language, right? I mean, even in my introduction this morning, I used the word narthex, and then I caught myself and I said, it's the lobby, you know, and that's a silly example. But again, I really appreciate that expansion of the idea, because as is noted often in the film, Sabbath, whether we call, you know, whether that's the term we're using or not, but I'm perfectly comfortable using it, is a communal act. And it seems to me that if this is why the person who was saying they're a caretaker for their loved one, how do we do this? And I think you had a wonderful response to that. But there is that element of, you know, if my kid's baseball team is playing on Saturday, and that's our Sabbath day, and I leave them at home, well, how effective is that, right? In observing Sabbath if the others aren't also doing the same thing. So,
sure. And you know, I mentioned earlier the Seventh-day Adventists. One of the things that's particular is Adventists tend to live in close proximity to each other, and so it's the easiest way to be able to find support for yourself. One of the segments that you didn't see in the film is we went to a Hasidic Jewish community in New York, and the entire community is Hasidic. And there's even a giant electric, you know, when you're driving down the highway and they have a sign that says you're going 45 miles an hour, you know, the electric sign that says, you know, you're going 49, you're passing speed limit. They have a sign in Brooklyn, New York, in Crown Heights that says Sabbath, Shabbat begins in 4 hours, 13 minutes, 4 hours, 12 minutes, 4 hours, 10 minutes. And so the whole community is all set and geared, regulated around the beginning of Shabbat. And that can be difficult for people who are not Orthodox Jews in that community. This is Crown Heights, New York. But it's also affirming. You're supporting each other in the act. You know that shop is going to be closed on Friday evening and all day Saturday. Everybody supports everybody in the act of doing that. It kind of used to be that way in America.
Right.
We used to have blue laws going back to the Puritan days. The idea was we would close business. You were encouraged to go to church and spend time with your family. All that was thrown out in the 70s and 80s. I grew up in New England a lot. New England, it was pretty strong in the blue laws. You couldn't, nothing was open. I'm like the priest and the monk who said, you couldn't buy anything on a Sunday. Everything was closed. But that's gone now. And in some ways, the film is not. We have a chapter about that in the film about the blue laws. But I would never call for the reinstatement of the blue laws. I kind of like it the way that it is. Frankly, if I have to, I'm happy to be able to go to 7-Eleven or Walmart to get what I need. But that's my choice. And I think religion is the way that you express your faith fundamentally has to be your choice. And I think we have a choice to support, spend all our days shopping and doing everything else like that, or do we treat Sabbath as a different day? Do we think about it differently? So for me, I think the privilege of being able to choose is much more important than the notion of the regulation of it. So, but the sacrifice is that you don't necessarily have that communal support. You don't have that physical proximity to others who are trying to help you, and you're helping them in the practice of your Sabbath.
Right. A moment ago, you spoke about how Sabbath is more than just an understanding of mandated rest. And so I wondered if you would comment some on what was touched on in the film about sabbatical years and Jubilee years and any of those topics.
Well, one of the stories that we did do is with the African-American pastor out in Indianapolis, Indiana, who it's very unusual, in fact, almost shunned upon that in the African-American Christian community that a pastor would take a Sabbath, a sabbatical year.
Yeah.
Many of the congregations were founded by that pastor. And the whole notion of them being able to walk away for a year just terrorizes them. They can't do it. But we found this wonderful, you just saw a glimpse of him at the beginning of the film. His name is Jeffrey Johnson, and he pastors Eastern Star Baptist Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. And his schedule is Herculean. He writes his sermon on Friday. He takes his Saturday as his Sabbath. And then on Sunday, he gets up early in the morning and he drives to the first of 3 churches that he began. And he preaches at the first church. There'll be about 1,000 people. He then, before the service is finished, he's in his car, he and his wife. They jump in the car and they drive to the second church. And he shows up at the second church just before it's time to preach the sermon. And he preaches the second sermon. It goes on for 45 minutes in classic African-American, bang that, we're going to get you the message. And when he finishes the sermon, he and his wife out the back door, he's going to a third church. And he preaches 3 times every Sunday to literally 3,000 people, because each church is built in such a way that it houses about 1,000 people each. And he had been doing that nonstop, no Sabbath, no sabbatical, for 32 years. He built those churches. Those were his babies. He was not going to walk away from them. But finally, somebody got to him and said, you are burning the candle at both ends. And so he took a sabbatical for 6 months. And we had come to him just after he had done the sabbatical. Oh, he was ready to go. He had taken his 6 months. He was ready to go again. We'll do another 33 years, So, but he wanted to talk about the fact that within the African-American community, the whole notion of taking a sabbatical is so foreign that's another dimension of the Sabbath notion, that whole notion of a sabbatical year. But he is now out as an evangelist for the notion to his brothers and sisters who are particularly in the Baptist community, to say, no, this is not in your best interest. It's given to us as a gift. Take it, because you need to fill that well yourself, and to be able to do that. So, and I understand that I was just like I said, in Pittsburgh. Most of the people that I spoke to in Pittsburgh were heads of congregations that were one pastor, some of them not even full-time, part-time pastors. And the idea of, if I'm not here on Sunday, who's going to do this? Who's going to make this thing happen? And they're scared to death to take a sabbatical. And yet at the same time, they realize deep down inside that if they don't, they are going to burn themselves out. And so that's the balance that we're all trying to figure out. And this living the faith is a balance, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, fundamentally, the Christian message makes no sense in the modern world. Turn the other cheek, forgive 70 times 70. That's the formula to get yourself beat up every week. But the truth of the matter is, this is what you're supposed to figure out, how we're supposed to do this. All of us fundamentally make accommodations. We have a faith that we try to understand at our hearts and live the best possible thing the way we can. And yet we're living in this real world. We're living in Rome. And we're trying to figure out how all this is going to work. And we're accommodating every way we can. But I do think from the topic of Sabbath, I think there is a way that we can carve out ourselves a little bit of time for ourselves and call that time sacred.
Yeah.
And really, really honor it as if it is.
There's a good part of the film dedicated to the idea of Sabbath as restorative justice. And we heard a little bit of that in the sense of the land, but there's also a good amount too about communities that think of Sabbath as restorative healing for their community, right? Medical clinics. It's not just food banks or that sort of thing, but really restoring people. That idea of healing and wholeness.
Yeah, I think one of the topics that we sort of touched on, but so briefly, and I regret that. Looking at there's never a film that you make that you don't go back and say, "Oh man, I wish." But we did touch on the notion. One of the things that's central to the notion of the sabbatical year is the notion of the forgiveness of debt. And boy, isn't the place where what you believe in and what hits your wallet the hardest, where the rubber really hits the road. And time and time again, you see the examples that are sort of lived out in the real world that we live in. And Sabbath, the sabbatical principles call you to forgive debts every 7 years. And after the 50th year, the Jubilee year, like you mentioned, that's you have 7-year cycles. And after the 7th 7-year cycle, the 49th year, the next year is a 50th year. It's the Jubilee year. And there have been, over the course of even recent history, people have been saying it's the 50th year. We as nations have to forgive third world debt. We have to be able to help them. That didn't go over very well. No. That did not go over very well. I remember Bono from U2 out on the street saying, no, the Jubilee year, we have to forgive debts. We have to. That lasted about an hour. Nobody wanted to hear about that because they'll go to church, but when it's time to actually put those principles into practice, that's even the harder thing. So I think for me, Sabbath is calling us to reevaluate and think about all these principles, and then try to find the way that we can actually put them into practice for ourselves. And that's what we're called to do.
Yeah. In your film, you talk about Sabbath as an ancient practice meeting the modern world. So what are the things that you discovered are truly very modern in nowadays in a practice of Sabbath?
Well, I mean, it's no joke to say this is the first time in history that everybody's available to be connected at any time. We are globally connected, and yet we're locally, personally, as estranged as ever before. And isn't that the great irony of it all? I mean, you can get on the internet right now and you can talk to your friends in China, and yet at the same time you can be lonely as can be. And I think that's the great mystery that we're all trying to deal with. Now, this is a new moment in history for all of us. The communication is instantaneous, and we're expected to respond instantly. And I think that adds a certain immediacy that we're still trying to deal with and wrestle with. One of the things we mentioned in the film, it's not in the chapter that you saw, is one of the popular notions right now. That's not it's not being initiated by religious people, but it's being practiced by atheists and agnostics and non-religious people. It's called a tech Sabbath. People across the country, around the world, are deciding that one day a week, I'm putting my cell phone down. I'm putting my laptop down. I'm walking away from the desktop. I'm not doing it. And yet they call it a tech Sabbath, because they know that the word Sabbath has an enormous amount of power. It still continues to resonate. You understand that there's a principle behind this. And so they call it a tech Sabbath, and it's getting a lot of traction. And I think it's because we all feel this sense of, we just can't get away from it. And in some ways, I kind of think we don't.
Sure.
We want to know that if that phone rings, it might be a loved one that needs us. We're making ourselves available if we have to be available. And that can in itself be exhausting.
Sure.
And yet we have to be the ones who self-discipline and say, you know, at some point, I may check the phone now, I do, but I'm not going to, that'll start again on Monday. That'll start again on Monday.
Sure. In my world, there is the rhythm of a week, and so Sabbath appearing once a week, but also I live by the calendar of the church, and each year, different seasons, Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, they all have a different feel, right? And a different theme and a different way that we're being prepared for something and then celebrating something. And so where I see that happening in my world is in Lent, when people often give up something, right? Creating that space. And plenty of colleagues will take a Sabbath from social media and they'll say, I'm signing off for Lent. And again, it goes to that idea of disconnecting so that one can actually connect.
Sure.
Right?
I was just thinking that, I was laughing because I was just thinking, well, you've just come out of your rest period, haven't you? The summer, you're coming into the busy time. This is Advent now. It's get ready because it's that Advent and then Christmas and then Lent is coming on. So I hope you're feeling rested.
I feel great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very energized by this season. Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, we are all feeling as though we'd like to take some control back over this, but I think the expectations of us being able to respond immediately are there. But at the same, we were all grateful for that. You know, I just, you know, my wife and I talk about, we're shutting the phone off. We're not going to do it. Oh no, but he might call. Our son might, you know, he might need something. You know, so you in principle, you want to say no. I'm going to back off and do this. But again, I think all of us have to find that sense of equilibrium. But the fundamental point I think of the film is finding that sense of equilibrium means calibrating some notion of Sabbath into your life. And if we're living in what is said in the film later on, a very anti-Sabbath culture, then we have to sort of turn away from that and begin to sort of calibrate with an element of Sabbath that really does change the ratio of things for your life.
I don't know about the folks here, but I would love to hear from those gathered. Is it okay if we switch?
Oh, please. They look like a very smart group to me.
Questions and conversation, they do. We do have a microphone. And so if folks do want to respond or ask a question, I just ask that you wait for the microphone so that those who are joining us via Zoom can be heard. And Chris, you let us know if someone on Zoom has a question. But I would like to kick it off again by starting with that question of why. Why, this is assuming it is something that's part of your life, but why is Sabbath a part of your life or something that you strive for, that's on your radar at all? Why Sabbath for those of us gathered here?
Mine has been Lent years ago, and I truly don't even remember now who it was. It was a preacher in a sermon talking about not giving up something for Lent, but taking on something. And so for years, I took on a midweek Eucharist up at the seminary. We had seminarians and I got to know them, and I'd go have coffee with them. And the old chapel with the beautiful stained glass windows and the pipe organ really fed my soul on Wednesday mornings. And then when they started, you know, the different denominations of the seminarians, sometimes it was Church of Christ and sometimes it was stuff I have no idea what it was. I got the calendar, so I could only go when it was an Episcopal service. But I took that on every week that I could, as a time away from the normal stuff and a time to kind of feed my Episcopal roots. And one seminarian one time said, not one of ours, but a friend of ours, why do you come here to church? And my question was, have you ever seen St. Aidan's? No. I said, come see St. Aidan's. But I don't think of giving up chocolate or wine, or I try and take on a class, a book to read. And so it's a little tiny piece of Sabbath, but now I think I'll have to work on making it bigger.
Thank you for that.
I think one of the nicest, you know, we were probably out on the road parts of 20 weeks around the country doing the film. spent a week in Los Angeles, in the inner cities of Los Angeles, California, at a wonderful church. It's called Our Lady Queen of Angels, but it's right adjacent to the original plaza in Los Angeles, which dates into the 1800s, and so it's called La Placita, meaning the little plaza. And that's the nickname. Everybody knows this church now is La Placita. And so it's primarily a church that has 8 services every Sunday. Wow. 4 of them said by the pastor. 4 of them every Sunday. In addition, they have on the average 50 baptisms a week.
Wow.
This is hopping. This place is really hopping, and they were very gracious, and they brought out for us. They have them every month, they said, but they made sure that when we were coming, they were going to have them. They had a mariachi band, so the place is cooking, and we just had the greatest time. When it was all done and over with, the pastor comes up to me and he says, "I want to thank you." And I said, "No, it's us. You know, you've been a great host, and we want to thank you." No, Martin. He says, "I want to thank you." He says, "Because I have been a pastor for 25 years, and I've realized with you coming out here and asking me all the questions and doing all this, I haven't really thought about Sabbath. I haven't really thought about it." And we had meetings and we prepared and we thought as a team about this notion because we knew the questions were coming. And with all the theological questions and the fact that I'm doing it every single weekend, I'm living it. I hadn't really thought about it. And so that's part of the hope for us for the film. That's why I talked about at the seminary. These are all pastors. And the whole notion of, I just haven't given this any thought. I've been thought about the dimensions of it, the depth of it, what it really means in my life. You can blow it off and say, yeah, I have to show up and say the service, and then I take a nap in the afternoon and everything. And I think you missed the point.
Sure.
So, but that was the nicest compliment I thought we got during the whole trip. So Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. And it's a great congregation. We had a lot of fun doing it. And great food, by the way.
What else want to share about Sabbath in your life?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, also so where there were blue laws, and I think one important part of the Sabbath is not shopping and engaging in commerce so that other people don't have to work, because that's the thing. And that, like, having this space when people and it's in communities, and I heard, it's tough because, as you say, different cultures have different days that do it, but having a collective time when we're not scheduling things and not doing things so that people can be in community, I think is important. So I guess it's like workers' rights is one reason why I care about Sabbath. But another one, like for the priests in particular, is like stepping away to make space for others. So he's been doing all the sermons at his church all the time. There's not room, he could pass away. There's that continuity part of stepping away so that others can come up. So that's another side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, one of the stories that you didn't see, we did a little Blue Laws story in the film to talk about it because it's part of the history of this country. It really is. Mm-hmm. There's a town in New Jersey that we went to because it's one of the remaining towns in America that still holds on to the Blue Laws. And their argument is that we can make as much commerce during the 6 days as we can if we spread it out over 7 days. There's only going to be so many dollars that are spent over the course of the week anyway. Let's do them in 6. And what they found was that the people wanted to come to that county because they knew the Blue Laws were still in effect, and they knew they were guaranteed a day off. And every other county in the state of New Jersey, people were being asked to work at different schedules and different times, but always across a 7-day week. And they could easily get people to move into the county because they knew they were going to get a day off. And it's as much about the workers and giving the workers a day off as it is anything else.
Yeah.
That's social justice piece.
That's a social justice. Remember, you were slaves, and remember that you were slaves, and
right.
That's Deuteronomy, right?
That's exactly right. There's I can't remember who says it in the film, but they say that Sabbath is an act of resistance.
It is, yeah.
Right.
Wonderful book. I'll recommend a book. Actually, I'll recommend 2. One is Walter Brueggemann, the classic Old Testament theologian. His book is called Sabbath as Resistance. And he's in the film, and he wasn't in the clip that we showed. And he's a big believer in that. That's our way, commerce and business is the new pharaoh. And it will take everything from you if you let it. And at some point you have to draw the line. That's his theological argument. And the other book I'll recommend is by the man who does show up occasionally in the film. The clip that you saw, his name is Norman Wirzba, W-I-R-Z-B-A, and his book is called Living the Sabbath. And it's a really wonderful read. Very easy. It's not theologically confusing. It's very straightforward about life. And his argument is that we are living in a very anti-Sabbath world. And he lays out the arguments for that. I think he was great in the film, and he's a really wonderful thinker down at Duke.
Yes, sir.
Pete. Coming.
Just a funny little thing occurred to me when you mentioned, Martin, forgiving debt. I thought at first, even though I have my hearing aids, and I thought you mentioned dealing with death.
Yes.
And
yes.
So from that, what I'm personally considering is, what is the reason, Pete, that you work so hard? You're retired now. You've been retired for 8 years in a job where you work too hard, and I'm still involved with so many things that do matter to me, but I'm asking myself, to what extent, what does it do to me really, in my soul? And so I think part of the opportunity of Sabbath is to ask ourselves that kind of question. What am I seeking? Status, reputation, all the reasons that I overdo things. And what's the other side of it? What do I really yearn for that's different from all of that? And maybe part of the Sabbath aspect of rest and prayer gives us an opportunity to consider that.
Well, I think those are the kind of questions, maybe Laura, you want to answer that, but I think those are the kind of questions that you can't answer over a cup of coffee. You need to sort of take some real time and really think about it and talk with people who love you and you love, and sort of come to some sense about it, and then make your own decision. I mean, if you love what you're doing, Pete, why would you stop? I mean, my wife and I have conversations about this a lot. We do. And she told me, you're not quitting. You're not stopping. You'll drive me nuts, first of all, if you stop. But I still have films I want to make. I still have ideas that I want to see come into reality. I'm still going, and I'll go until I can't go anymore. And so I don't think like in terms of retirement. I just think about not being able to do it anymore, and I just intend to keep on doing it. But I'm getting older now, and so I will take a vacation every once in a while. Thank God.
Pete, I think the beauty of how you frame that question is that I don't think anyone would say Sabbath is the day that we're doing it right, and the other 6 days of the week we're doing it wrong, but rather, is it a moment to step out of those 6 days of the week so that we can, in a personal sense, maybe be renewed or rested or restored, but also to have that clarity of how are we living, what is the shape of our life the other 6 days of the week. It's just that moment to then say, how are those 6 days sacred and not just productive for the sake of being productive, right? But how are they life-giving to you and to your community beyond, right?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When do you write your sermon, your Sunday sermon?
I write in the evening. I'm usually ready to start writing by Wednesday. And depending on the struggle with the text, it might be finished by my Sabbath day, which is a Friday. Sometimes, even if it's unfinished, I let it be for Friday and then I finish it on Saturday. But some days, my Sabbath day becomes the day I finish writing. Yeah, and that's the struggle, right? Because we take a space and we tend to want to fill it. right? And so if we've created a day of rest or a day of other, sometimes the temptation is too great to say, oh, wow, actually now I have time and space to do that thing I didn't get to earlier in the week. So
Yeah,
it's a struggle.
I would think too that you would say, well, this is, however you rational it out, but you could say to yourself, well, this is kind of sacred work. I'm doing God's work. I'm going to spend this day. It's supposed to be my day of rest, but I'm actually going to be reading the text. That's therapeutic and that's resting in itself. I'll read the text and I'll think about this. And there's all kinds of ways, again, how we accommodate what we're supposed to be doing and how we're living this life every single day and just trying to figure out how we make it work.
Sure.
And using the principles that are given to us and doing the things that we know in our own sense of conscience is good for us, and then what's not good for us. Right. So if you can get the sermon done by Saturday, and it's a good sermon, well, it's a win-win, right? It's a win-win.
Right. That's right. Are there questions out here or comments?
So this is all being. Patrick's got his hand up. Here it comes. Here it comes. This will be a question for Laura.
I'm a friend of Martin's. I actually saw him put this film together. And I, first of all, before I get to my question, I'll stop for a comment here because I can do that.
Please.
I can usurp the space here. Martin didn't tell you how much he struggled to develop this film because he was worried about stepping over the Jews who really are concerned about their holiday and their meaning of their Sabbath being usurped by the Christians and how the Muslims play in the secular world. And he collapsed all that and made it all fit very nicely. It was not an easy pull. So I know you struggle with that quite mightily, Martin. So I'll give you credit for that. Here's a question for one or both of you, because as I was hearing it, make it a Sabbath for the Lord. What did the word Sabbath mean before it got recorded you see on the Ten Commandments? Do we know what the word actually meant?
I think it is rest. I think it is
Shabbat in the
yes.
Hebrew.
But one of the rabbis says that an even better definition of it is not rest but contentment.
But I guess what came first, the name or the meaning? I guess because over a period of time, they got mushed. So we think of Saturday as the Sabbath, and that's what's made holy. Is that what it meant to Moses when he was told make it holy? Do we have any way to know?
Yes, and I thought you, as a biblical scholar too, in addition to being a nuclear scientist, would know that answer.
When I heard this, could have used the word a Sabbath, make it a Sabbath, holy to the Lord,
rather than the Sabbath.
Yeah,
as
the Sabbath.
The meaning of the article that probably doesn't actually exist in Hebrew anyway.
It's been translated now. I mean, it's mostly in our vernacular. It is, even in the ancient Jewish, it's now rest. It's the day of Sabbath. It is its own word, meaning Shabbat in Hebrew. But I should maybe go back and take a look at that. That's a really good question.
I'll look
if it shows up.
Patrick.
It may be lost to history anyway.
Yeah, Patrick gets a credit in the film because he was very helpful in some of the formulation of some of the ideas. We've had many conversations, he and Stasha.
Less than a tiny small amount.
You're in there. That's great. Thank you.
So would you share a little bit with what your plan is? Maybe Lisa would want to talk about this too. You're going to do more ongoing Sabbath related events or evenings or?
That we are. Do you want to?
Well, let me just throw a thing in that's been playing around in my mind just through this whole course of this conversation that kind of ties right into that. It's interesting that the way this event came into being was that we heard this thing, we got this little grain of something, this little nugget of something that was Sabbath. And before we met you and before we saw the film, something made everybody in the room go, ooh, let's talk about that. So already the fact of the idea of exploring Sabbath clearly resonated with something in us that we knew we wanted and had a longing for and maybe hadn't spent time with before. So I find it really interesting then, we don't always do a launch event and say, oh, we're going to talk about this again in November and then probably in December, and then maybe we'll do a thing late. We don't usually do that. And so I'm really appreciating now that it came to that group in that way to say, let's not just talk about it one day and then hope it leads people to a new place. Let's talk about it for a long time. What if it is a theme? What if we had somebody write to us this week and say, oh, you're doing a Sabbath thing. That made me think of another thing. I'd like to talk to you about that. And so to sort of plant a seed that lets us all then as a community, hopefully develop some shared language for what it means to give ourselves rest and to rest in community. There was something, I'm cheating because I already saw the film, but somebody says something about how maybe we can't take Sabbath because we don't trust that the other people are going to take Sabbath too. So if I take Sabbath and you didn't take Sabbath, are you going to get more work done than I did? Or are you going to look at me and go, if you hadn't been taking Sabbath, right? So if you get to this place where everybody can say, no, I support you in that Sabbath and talk to me about what it means to you. And I don't know, I just think that's a really exciting possibility for it to be a theme that then takes life in forms that we don't know yet. So yeah, Laura, say what we know. And what I love is that we don't even know. We know some of what we might do with it. And then the rest hopefully is born of the conversation and community.
Yeah, so the next idea is that we do want to have a moment for folks to watch the film together. We will also be able to provide you with access to the film if you prefer to watch at home. But we would like folks to be able to see it before our next gathering. And so that when we tease all these other wonderful nuggets that are in the film, you go, oh, I remember that. I love that too. And then in Advent, we'll have another program that's still being defined and was intentionally left open because we wanted this moment and this experience to help inform what the next step is, again, to be good listeners. For not just why is this theme of Sabbath important to the 3 or 4 of us that have been in planning this to this point, but why is it important to you, and what part and in what ways would you want to further explore that? So we'll work that out. We are also developing something for in the springtime around the theme of stillness, probably an early Lenten retreat. But again, connecting the idea of stillness even to Sabbath, that idea of pause, that moment of restoration, that break from the normal cycle. And so that's where I think you'll see the thread maybe pop up in really obvious ways where we're using the word Sabbath, and maybe in other ways where it's a little more less obvious and maybe more tangentially related, but still I think important. So more to come.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to provide to you, Lisa and Laura, the entire film to put you on your website. But you also have access on our website to be able to use all that educational material. So all there's a whole body of material that we have about how to present the film in your congregation, arguments and themes and additional readings and everything else like that. And we'll make all that available to you too, if you can use any of that too. Thanks. So it's all yours.
We're grateful. Thank you. Are there any closing thoughts or comments before we close for the evening?
Did you like what you saw on the film? Was it okay? Sorry?
Yeah. Huge thank you, he said.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all your help. You should have been here. Everybody should have been here about 6:30. There was madness getting here. No, because the added component now is that we have, I guess you would have some idea, but there's a whole Zoom audience out there that's watching what's going on, and to how to connect this conversation and the clip that was being shown so that everybody got all parts back at home, and you guys worked that all out. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all. I think that's it then. Thank you, Martin.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.